Hello and good morning. Today's an exciting day because guess what I'm going to be doing today? Today I'm going to be putting up the trellis in the garden for the tomatoes. So that's always an exciting day for me because when I'm putting those trellises up, then that means my tomatoes are getting big enough to fall over and getting ready to produce before much longer. So this is the way that I trellis all of my tomatoes, or well, the majority of my tomatoes. I like to use the cattle panels. That's my favorite way, just because you have one really long panel that you can put multiples of tomatoes on. So I probably put about eight tomatoes on one cattle panel. Now I don't have anybody helping me today, so just kind of overlook the unconventional way that I'm going to be doing it. So because they're a little heavy, they're very floppy, and so I'm going to have to use my brain a little bit on how to get them put up by myself. So anyway, it's not going to be as big of a deal as it sounds like. I can get it done. I've done it before, but I usually like to wait on my husband to help me. But I don't have time to wait. They're already falling over and I've got to get it done. So here we go, y'all. Okay, let me show you what I've got going on here. So here's my T-posts. I have not pounded them in yet. I've just kind of stuck them down in there, just enough to hold them in place. And I have kind of just looked down through here to make sure that they are straight, in a straight line with one another. And I have used two in a long line before, and they'll hold it, but the panel, which is this, is a little floppy when I do it like that. So this year I think I'm going to use 3 in a row instead of 2, and I just think that'll make it a little more secure. Here's what the panel looks like. And I don't know the exact size of this. I can look it up if anybody's interested, but it's just a standard cattle panel. Some people call them hog panels. The only difference you may find in some of the places that you go in calling it a hog panel or a cattle panel or whatever kind of animal panel you want to call it are the sizes of the squares. And for the purpose that we are using them, it really does not matter. So I have some that are actually a couple different sizes. These are the smaller squares. And then I have some that are larger that look more like a rectangle. But like I said, that does not matter for the purpose that we're going to be using it for. We're just going to use it to let tomatoes grow up. You can see the tomatoes are already beyond ready to climb up this thing. There's one that's real tall. So while I was gone on vacation for literally just 3 days, they grew a whole lot. It rained the whole time I was gone, so. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the camera on a time lapse and let you kind of watch what I do. Like I said, what I'm going to do is going to be a little unconventional because I'm working by myself today, so I've got to get a little creative in how to get this thing up because it's pretty floppy and it's heavy. So in my mind, it has worked out really well. So it may not work out in reality like it has in my mind. So I'm just praying that it will. So here we go, y'all. Let's get started. Okay, y'all, the time lapse did not start. So I'm so sorry, but I've got one more I'm going to put up and I'll make sure that the time lapse is on for that one. I knew as I was coming around the fence that I had better look and make sure that it started, and I forgot to. I get sidetracked pretty easy. But anyway, let me show you what I've done so far. So let me get from the other end. I have 2 of them up, but it's hard to see unless you're looking at it from a distance. So there's the first one, and there's the second one just behind it. That one has 3 T-posts, and this one just has 2. I thought about removing those and spreading them out more and putting one in the middle, but I just went with it since I had already banged them in yesterday with a hammer. So I figured why let all that hard work go to waste. Anyway, so what I done was I just used that little rectangle pot right there, and I just lifted one end of the cattle panel up on top of it and kind of leaned it up against that post. Then I went down to the other end, lifted it up, and then secured it with a zip tie. So I'm literally just going in through the hole with a zip tie and attaching it to the fence panel, tightening it up as much as I can. And when I'm finished, I'll cut that extra piece off. Then I've done the same thing here and here. And I've done the same thing on these. These are different kind of T-posts. These T-posts are a lot more heavy duty, but they don't have the holes in them like the other one does. So you just kind of have to push the fins up against the little nipples that are sticking out here and then secure your zip tie around it like that. And I always go up higher than the T-posts. These are 7-foot T-posts, and I always go up higher than the T-post because these tomatoes will grow really tall. I mean, you can see how tall they are already. This one here is getting close to being halfway up. So they grow pretty tall. So the higher you can get the fins up, the better. But if you put it up too high, then it's going to take the tomato so long to reach it. So this is kind of the middle ground, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break and go pick up my grandson. And then I will be back to do the third and final one. And I won't forget to start the time lapse this time. Okay, so I've got one more row to do. I'm going to put one more pole in the middle to make it 3 T-posts in that row, and then I'll put the cattle panel up, and hopefully I'll remember to turn it on this time. Starting to get a little bit of rain. Hopefully it will not rain very much. If it's just sprinkling like it is right now, I'm okay with that, but if it does much more than that, we'll have to do this another time. Now once you get your cattle panel up, it's time to get your tomatoes tied up to it. So there's several different ways you can do it, and just use whatever you have on hand. You don't have to buy anything special for that. I'm just going to be using some string for the most part. I have some clips that I call tomato clips, like this. I have some of those somewhere, and I will eventually find them and use these as well, because you're going to be consistently tying your plants and retying them to the cattle panels as they grow, because as they grow they're going to need support. So if you have a tomato that is falling over and it has not reached the cattle panel yet, then you can always use string. Just use some string to go from the bottom of the cattle panel down to the tomato to just support it. Don't tie it tight though. You have to allow room for growth on these things. So let me give you an example of one I've already tied. So see this one here that I've already tied? You can see that this stem has plenty of room to grow. If you tie them tight all the way up, if you tie them tight up against the trellis, then you're not going to allow room for the stem to actually expand and grow. And they do, they grow. So I've got several of them secured already. Sometimes I will weave them in and out of the squares also, but you have to be really careful when you do that, because I've also broke them trying to weave them in and out of the squares. So sometimes I weave it if it's one that is kind of sticking out enough so that I can bend it without bending it a lot, bending it enough to break it. So all of these are going to have to be trimmed up also. So I'll do a separate video on how to keep your tomatoes pruned. You just have to make sure that you have the correct kind of tomato. It's the indeterminate tomatoes that need to be trimmed. I do trim my determinants a little bit but only enough to keep good airflow going through it, because whenever you trim your determinants too much, you will not get as much production as you are really hoping for. Same thing for your cherry tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes is kind of controversial. Some people say not to trim them, some people say to trim them. I trim mine a little bit, but I don't prune them back like I do a full-size indeterminate tomato variety. Well, it started pouring the rain, so I'm going to quit for now, and I'll come back out here in just a little bit, hopefully, and finish up this video. So now all that's left is to attach them to the cattle panel however you want. There are so many different ways to do it. Like I told you a minute ago, sometimes I would weave them in and out, but that's not always the best way because they can break. So I have lots of leftover twine. I have a roll of twine that I just purchased. I have some of the garden twist tie, different things. I even have some of these, and these are just little clips. I don't even remember where I bought them, maybe the dollar store or something. And this one, I literally just clip it around one and then on around the fence panel. And that's all there is to it. So after we attach all of them to the fence panel, we will be completely finished. Some of these that are already starting to fall over, but they're not big enough to reach the top or to reach the bottom of the trellis yet. You see how much that lacks reaching? And this one is doing the same thing. So it's not quite tall enough to reach the trellis. So those will have to be tied up with a string. That way you can let it reach down to where the plant is at. Remember to tie it loosely. Now that'll hold it until it's able to reach the trellis, and then I'll be able to tie it up just a little bit better. I have to do the same thing to this one over here. I'm going to get just a little bit closer on this one. See the little tomatoes here that are starting to form. So whenever you are tying these up, be careful to not pull those loose. I usually just tie a little quick release knot. And that way, as it starts to get closer to the bottom of the trellis, I can retie that. Just look at that, you all. Talk about feeling accomplished. That's a big feat for me. I really feel accomplished today. Got all my cattle panels up in the garden. Well, I think that's all I'm going to do for today, you guys. Tomorrow, though, we're going to be back out here trimming some of the leaves and things off of the bottom. and I'll show you all how to prune a tomato and how to make it nice and healthy. So I hope to see you again for that video. You all have a great day. God bless you.